Hey, welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic. And Elizabeth Warren has a tax to propose, and we're going to try to keep it a little even keeled today, but it's something truly, truly stunning. Joining me today are John Richardson and Keith Redman. Gentlemen, good day to you and good morning. We're going to try to get to the meat and potatoes of this, and then we'll try to explain and try to get not to get too again not get too outraged. So let's take a look at what we have here. Senator Warren is proposing a wealth tax on every American citizen, and including property held out the United States. And so here's the problem we have with that. What's the first problem we have with that, John?
Well, I mean, the problem with it is it's the definition again of applying to everybody in the world with respect to U.S. assets and every American citizen with respect to the assets where they may happen to have anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
And in her press release announcing this tax, she, very stridently said that this needs to apply to any American citizen
Mm,
wherever they live in the world,
mm,
etc.
mm.
And the result of this is, and this is not at all difficult to see, is that this tax is the attempt to impose a wealth tax, in some cases, on assets owned by non US citizens located outside the United States simply because they're married to an American.
It's pretty crazy, and it's sort of interesting too. The title of it is for ultra millionaire, a new term for ultra millionaire that is precisely defined as what Elizabeth Warren isn't, because that threshold is $50 million. It just coincidentally happens to be above her threshold. The modest college professor Elizabeth Warren somehow became, her net worth is $25 million or so. So she cleverly designed herself as not as being exempt by it. So that's one part of it. The other thing is that in a lot of countries, there's some things as community property, so that if you marry somebody who's wealthy, that is now what happens with that. What John? What happens if you marry someone who's wealthy and you're a U.S. person and they're not? Does the
Well,
IRS?
well, I think you're asking, at least two, maybe three questions at once. But let's first of all look at the situation where you have two people, individuals with wealth, each of which is below $50 million. Let's imagine that one of them is 26 million and the other has 24 million. The way the law is written, that once they're married, the full 50 million uh, threshold has been met, right? So, and this is, by the way, regardless of whether somebody is inside the United States or outside
Mm,
the United States. But interestingly, I mean, really, you look at a society, you look at the tax code, right? But this makes marriage extremely dangerous, for a certain kind of people. My mother once, in her, she always has a great way of putting these things, used to talk about the financially efficacious marriage. All right, now it's the first time I'd ever heard it put that way, but what a nice neutral way to put
yes,
it.
yes, yeah.
Well,
That's lovely.
so you see, now the financially efficacious marriage would be that you need to make sure that you don't marry somebody with significant assets that will pull your own assets into this. Okay, that's number one. Now, number two, I mean, this is going to be, I mean, this is great, Anthony. Get yourself into family law, prenup agreements, all this kind of stuff, right? But what's also interesting is, what do they mean by property, right? And, at the risk of oversimplification, there are two kinds of property regimes in the world: separate and community. And in a community jurisdiction, let's say like California would be, I think one of the more well known ones in the United States. What happens is that by virtue of the marriage, property, which would normally have been owned individually, is now owned jointly, right? So let's say we have an American citizen living outside the United States in some, community property country, what have you, who marries a wealthy individual who's not a U.S. citizen, right? Now, all of a sudden, according to the U.S. rules, the person who did not have the money, the U.S. citizen who married the person with the money, will now be deemed to own the property, okay, of the person that who he or she married. Okay, so I mean, this is a very, very, very clear way for this wealth tax to impose a direct wealth tax on property that was never purchased by a U.S. citizen, never been in the United States, no connection to the United States, other than perhaps marriage to an American citizen. And I mean, the whole, it's an attack on marriage. Okay, it's a clear attack on marriage. There's no question about that. But that aside, people have different views of that. That aside, I think one can say very objectively that this proposed wealth tax operates to essentially confiscate a portion of assets that were never bought by U.S. citizens and are outside the United States. Okay, now that's the first part of it. But you talk about this being a global wealth tax. I mean, we can look at taxation applying to people, which is what I've just talked about, but we can also look at it as applying to property. Now, Senator Warren doesn't stop, okay, with the people. I mean, another part of this thing is, as you know, there are many non-resident aliens who own property in the United States. Well, the property owned by the United States, to the extent that it meets the thresholds, will also be subject to this wealth.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so not only do we have the draconian estate tax,
Right.
if they die, but we have the wealth tax, right?
Yeah, and I just want to add on I see some people hopping on. We're talking about Senator Warren's proposal, and what John just talked about, what he just mentioned, the draconian estate tax. There's actually two estate tax regimes. If you're a U.S. person, there's that gift and estate tax, and there's a very high exemption on it right now, with whatever $12 million for a married couple, somewhere around there. There's also a very, very draconian estate tax for non-resident aliens, that is non-U.S. persons who have property in the U.S. And the exemption on that is what, like $80,000, and the rate's 33%.
It's not even indexed to inflation.
Right. It's so. I mean, one of the things, if you are a U.S. person, or if you're not a U.S. person, you have assets in the U.S., make sure they're not in your name. You got to make sure, because otherwise, you can get a really, really, or your heirs would get a very nasty surprise on there, and you got to watch out for that. That is absolutely true. Now, I want to ask Keith a question here, because here's what we see in this. This is what I'm seeing right in this thing here. In section 2904 of the bill, information reporting, Keith. It looks like we're going to have the same kind of international information regime like we do have for AFBAR and FATCA here. What do you think about that, buddy? I bet everyone you're talking to seems excited about that.
Oh, sure. Just another information avenue for the U.S. Yeah, that's going to go over real well.
And Keith, you've talked to people. I mean, just to give people some background into this, when we talk about these informational reporting penalties, what are we talking about for amounts when someone doesn't report a bank account, or someone doesn't report a foreign trust or gift? What kind of amounts are we talking about?
Well, I don't know the exact amounts off the top of my head, but they're quite extreme, where you could be ruinous for an American overseas, who doesn't adhere to the reporting regime. And this is just another reporting regime, if you will, to just rake in the penalties, and it's, that's why when I talk to people, I tell them to think long and hard about them continuing to be a U.S. citizen. Obviously, it's up to them, but what I say to them is that you never know what's going to change in the coming months or years. Case in point, with this particular thing that Warren is proposing, that it's better to just get out, retire your U.S. citizenship. And this is just another example on why, to quote somebody we both know, all roads lead to renunciation. And I'm speaking specifically, obvious, of Americans overseas.
Mm.
It's too much. And
Well, it
number one,
doesn't
and
seem
number
like,
two,
and I
and
think,
last, and number two, and I'll shut up, is that it doesn't give any incentive for anyone to even enter the U.S. tax system with all these reporting regimes. It's just there's no incentive there.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's getting a little, it's getting a little much. And this is the quote. And I think this is really indicative of Miss Warren there. This is what she said. Based on fact, the wealthy in this country are paying less in taxes than everyone else. Where does she get this information? Where does she get this information is what I want to know. Maybe some are, and there's certainly ways that if you're very wealthy, there's certain ways you can avoid it. So maybe she knows about all these tricks. Well, but maybe she should disclose who they are, right? And said, but see, here she goes. She goes, asking them to step up and pay a little more. Isn't that funny? You're asking us. No, you're not asking us. Why do you keep saying you're asking us? You're forcing us under gunpoint to do this or else. It's not asking.
Right.
It's not stop that. Stop that, Elizabeth. Asking them to step up and pay a little bit more. You're telling me that they would forfeit their American citizenship, right? Listen to her, right? Or that they had to do that. Well, I'm just going to call their bluff on that. Yeah, and you got to change your voice to her Karen tone to really get that through, right? I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. So she knows that she's like, well, they're just not going to leave. She's convinced that we have these people prisoned. They're not going to leave. Now, maybe one reason why is this, because in the law, she inserts this little baby. So if you try to expatriate, John, help me out with this one. Help me understand this. Is this right? That your exit, your new rate for your wealth tax is going to be 40%?
The way I understand it is that the exit tax is going to be raised to 40%. Okay, that's
Of your wealth.
the way I understand it is that the wealth tax operates alongside the exit tax.
Okay, I got okay.
Right. So the wealth tax, once it's in there, it just keeps sucking away your
Okay, so okay, got it.
The exit tax, as you may know, is you
A
can
type
view
of wealth tax already. The exit tax is a wealth tax.
it's a
as well.
tax based on a deemed sale, right? Now,
Right.
the wealth tax is based on no realization, just based on the asset. The exit tax is based on pretend there was an actual sale. So my understanding of the provision is that if you expatriate, well, the wealth tax applies regardless. Okay, that's just part of what it means to be an American. But the exit tax, which you would also pay if you're a covered expatriate, will be raised to 40%. Right. So I think what
Okay.
it is, we've got this horrible wealth tax coming in, but in addition, not if you try to escape by expatriating, not only are you subject to the exit tax, but we want to make the exit tax even more punitive.
Okay, yeah, all right, wow. Oh, yeah, really something. So maybe, yeah, she's really up to something. And this is what she's claiming is that, and I don't know if this quote was right, a 2% wealth tax changes this country fundamentally because it means we say as a nation, we are going to invest in the next generation. We're going to invest in creating opportunity, not just for the handful at the top. We're going to create opportunity for all our kids. I don't think she has kids. I don't think she has children. Does she have children? That's how we build a strong future in this country.
Yeah, she does have children.
She does have children. Okay, all right. Well, it's nice she's exempted them from this, I guess, as well too. So here we're having the classic argument. Now, look, this is like, why don't we just go back to 1912? Because these were the same arguments presented back in 1912 with the income tax. Like, hey, look, utopia is just one small income tax away. It's going to be a tiny little bit on the rich, folks. It's just going to be a tiny little, and then everything will be paid for. We won't have any more poor in this country. That is what was sold in 1912, 1913. The Revenue Act of 1913 was passed, and very shortly, by the end of World War II, there were 50,000 IRS agents overseeing about 110 million people, U.S. Americans. So very quickly, it blew up, and it was able to perhaps fund a lot of wars that may not have been funded otherwise. So why haven't anyone asked Elizabeth Warren about that? Well, what about the original promises in 1912 about the income tax? This is what it was supposed to do. So that didn't do the trick. Why is this going to do the trick? And I don't think it's designed to do the trick myself, because here's the thing: is this is a theme I ask all the time. Who is the constituency for all of these things? We've talked about Senator Ron Wyden last week. And like, who is the person directing him to crack down on Americans overseas and all this wealth and go after this and that? I want to know who's in America. Like, you know what? I'm really concerned about someone in Indonesia. If there's an American in Indonesia, are they paying their fair share? Who is that person? And I can't really find it. But here, it's interesting. Here, we find out who is sponsoring this bill, and it's sponsored by Oxfam, a non-governmental organization. But this is how Oxfam describes themselves. Oxfam is a global organization that fights inequality to end poverty and injustice. We offer life-saving support in times of crimes and crisis, and advocate for economic justice, gender equality, and climate action. We demand equal rights and equal treatment so that everyone can thrive, not just survive. Now, I'm not going to get into all their claims about what they're doing, but I just want to go to what they're actually saying, not disputed. They're a global organization that claims to be representing everyone on the planet. Okay? Why is Elizabeth Warren listening to them? They're not. I am sorry, Elizabeth Warren. Someone who is not an American is not your constituent. It seems like hard to say that. What do you guys, John, what would you say? Because this is sort of this is probably where we get a little bit emotional, because we see generally Democrats abroad just taking this mantle of the globalists and saying, yes, this is how we get back at Trump. What would you say to Oxfam and that are you surprised that they're the sponsor of this, John?
No, but I'm not sure. I think that they're I'm certainly supportive of it. But I mean, let's not give Senator Warren any wiggle room out of this. This is Senator Warren. Okay, this is her thing. And it's generally supported by the rank and file Democrats, et cetera. I mean, obviously, I think that any elected U.S. representative should be trying to represent the interests of Americans first.
Doesn't that seem like it seems like a very quaint idea that we haven't had, like, wouldn't it be, it seems like, and even when I said that out loud, I'm like, wow, it seems like I'm saying something, revolutionary, that a U.S. senator, it used to be U.S. senators represented the states, and that was changed in which amendment? The 17th Amendment. Now senators are representing Americans in their state. Okay, so when you're going, you don't seem to be. Who are the people in Massachusetts? That's who I'm concerned. Elizabeth Warren, show me the press release of the people coming in from Massachusetts to say, hey, look, we're really concerned about these things. But it's funny, she doesn't, because it doesn't seem that there be anyone there.
Yeah, the problem is that neither political party, the party system has evolved to the point in the United States where elected politicians no longer represent American citizens. And this is, why, independents are the future. It's why more and more people no longer identify as being supporters of these parties and are independents. But the people like Senator Warren are not only a clear and present danger to the present and future of the American democratic process, but they're frankly a clear and present danger to America, because she is out proposing all these tax policies to essentially attack the rest of the world. Which FATCA is one example. Citizenship taxation. Remember her quote, I support citizenship taxation. Right now, understand what that means. To say you support citizenship taxation, given that the only practical meaning that citizenship taxation actually has is the U.S. imposition of taxation on people who don't live in the United States with respect to the income they never earned in the United States. I mean, to say I support citizenship taxation is to say, hey, I support the United States claiming the tax residents of other countries as our tax residents. That's exactly what it means. And unfortunately, that is precisely what the Democratic Party stands for. All right, we see this in their representatives. We see this in FATCA. We see this shockingly in this recent Democrats Abroad France election, where the one candidate who made ending FATCA and citizenship taxation the priority on the platform was specifically not elected. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I mean, isn't it pretty clear that? I mean, maybe they would say, well, we don't approve of this, but it's not really our priority. Look, this has reached the point where you're either on the side of freeing the rest of the world from these ridiculous U.S. tax policies, or you're part of the movement to extend them. And there is no doubt in my mind that that particular election is strong evidence that the Democratic Party has no interest in getting rid of these U.S. tax policies and clear interest in extending them. Now, people will say, well, and by the way, to be clear, the proposal we're talking about today does go back to 2021, but that doesn't matter, okay, because the arguments that are being made are very, very much the same as the exit tax arguments made by Democrats in 95 or 96, and it took 10, 15 years before the law came into force. Very much like the incredibly outrageous Wyden report that we talked about last week that manages to dig up two people, and say, therefore, we need to change all these laws, for everybody else, et cetera. So, this stuff is very, very concerning on many levels.
Well, I mean, the Democrat Party was, Andrew Jackson. He was a man of the people. He was a man of the people. He was a man of Americans. And now the Democratic Party doesn't seem to be a party of Americans. They don't want that. They're party of people around the world. And I don't know, not even sure how many people around the world. It seems just maybe a handful of people who could benefit. See, we have a bunch of people adding. So I just wanted to, joining our podcast. So I just want to do a quick review of what we've done so far. So Senator Warner is proposing a tax on the wealthy around the world, exempting herself because she falls below the threshold. Going to be huge problems.
Anthony, she exempted you and me too, by the way.
Yeah, right. I guess so. So far, yeah.
Maybe Steve.
I'm exempt as well. We have a situation where a lot of the reporting regimes that we've seen with FATCA and FBAR, there's going to be that too. So we know in the 3520s where they can get to penalize on the value of the asset, not lack of compliance, as another parallel way to confiscate wealth, along with this 2% yearly tax on wealth. It's global. She's claiming people won't leave, and maybe there's a reason why, because there's actually an increase in the expatriation tax to 40%. It's not a 40% wealth tax, but it's the increase to 40% of your exit tax if you attempt to expatriate. And she claims it's going to, create the land of milk and honey. Maybe perhaps unaware of the original promises of the income tax of 1913. This is sponsored by Oxfam, a global organization that doesn't represent Americans and doesn't claim to represent Americans. And Senator Warren doesn't think this is a problem whatsoever. She actually boasts about it. And now here we are. It's like, this is where I would say, this is where we are right now. Just to keep what you have, right? Let's just say that this is a wealth tax. You're over the threshold, right? Just to keep what you have to pay a 2% tax on your wealth, right? Well, you need something that then makes more than 2% just to stay even. And then you have also, hey, you got to make sure you report it, correctly. Otherwise, you're going to get cracked and you're going to lose your wealth anyway. And this is also in addition to all the other tax increases that we've seen. There's been a transition tax and there's GILTI as well. These are all things that affect businesses overseas, but this wealth tax is actually going to affect every American. And this is why we said, look, everything that's happening overseas is a trial balloon for what's going to be implemented in the US. And we see it happening again and again. Do you trade in cryptocurrency? Oh boy, that's question's new. That's a few years. That's new. It's been around for a few years. They didn't ask that before. Well, why are you asking that one? Oh, because we want to go after your cryptos and penalize you for that. It's all laying the groundwork for that. And so this is what we have been seeing. And I'm not sure if this was, this is what I would say here. It used to be a time. There used to be a time someone like Senator Warren would never be senator. Her complete misrepresented, representing her background as someone who's Native American when she's not. And her test just proves how little she was. And that would be someone who would be immediately disqualified from ever running for office. That sort of lie, that sort of misrepresentation would exclude something. But we live in a world where, you just lied about everything. Don't worry about it. You're going to be a great senator, honey. Don't worry about it. That's where we are. That's more of the troubling thing. And I think that's where we get into this, the tribes that we have. And the tribes that we have aren't necessarily internal American tribes. Rather, there seems to be a tribe that represents, citizens, more or less. Then there seems to be a tribe more concerned with the globe. What's going around? What can the United States of America, how can we impact and change our laws to allegedly help the poor around the world that don't ever seem to quite be helped by us? They really don't. Oh boy, no. Here we are. So what do you think, guys? Do you think this has any chance of getting anywhere? Is this just some sort of Elizabeth Warren fundraising campaign, and now the Republicans can fundraise off of this ridiculous proposal? Is this just agitation to keep us guessing what they're going to get next, or do you think there's a real shot of this getting passed? I'll go with Keith first.
Nothing will surprise me.
Yeah.
Nothing will surprise me, in all seriousness. I don't have anything else to say. It's just incredible.
That is
And And I will say this, what I have a very hard time with, and I know a lot of people know this about me, is that when things like this come out, and I'm, as you know, I'm very focused on Americans overseas, is that we don't get pushback from the American overseas organizations on this. There's no pushback. And I mean, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. So, yeah.
Great.
Well, go through.
Keith, my answer was like, I don't think that this will go, but the truth is what you said is more accurate. I wouldn't be surprised if it, seeing what's gotten through so far.
Or some semblance.
You're right. I wouldn't be surprised because, and by the way, we find an interesting way that Republicans and Democrats find a way for that hey, they're going to be bipartisan when it screws over the Americans. So they have no problem doing that. Hey, yeah, there's something in it for us. There could certainly be that hey, they're at each other's throats, but boy, when it comes to the taxing, they find a way to work together. Isn't that great? John, what would you say? And I'll lead you with the concluding remarks. Does this have any chance of passing? What do you think is going to happen here?
Two answers. The first answer is there is absolutely, as George Bush would have said, read my lips. There is absolutely no question that this will become the law or a variant of it. It's just a question of how long it takes. Because what happens with this type of stuff, I mean, if you look at the hearings on the exit tax in the mid-90s, people thought it was like from outer space, crazy, human rights abuses, no problem. So they're going to get the stuff through. There's no question about that. Now, I don't know when. Maybe it'll be 10 years, 15 years, but all Americans need to see their future is to watch the activities of the Senator Warrens of today, okay? Somebody else's name will be on it, and also will be justified because there are European countries with wealth taxes, etc. Now, the second sort of comment that I would have on this is that this is not going to upset a lot of people because they're going to think it doesn't apply to them. It will eventually.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
Through a combination of inflation and extending the tax in ways that was not anticipated. An example would be, look at the way the Biden administration is trying to extend the net investment into income tax, right now into other forms of things. But finally, I would really encourage people to consider these things in terms of not whether it affects them, but that all of these laws should apply to everybody. You know, if you believe there should be a wealth tax, then it should be applied to the wealth of the rich and the wealth of the poor. Okay. Otherwise, you know, what this is, you know, one more example of the weaponization of the tax system, you know, which exists in so many different ways. You know, we go after a certain group just because there's something there that maybe we can take, or, we find somebody we don't like, and therefore we, find some violation of a tax law or reporting requirement, etc. And I think that Americans should be whether you agree with the wealth tax or not, I think that Americans should, as a whole, should be very, very concerned about what I believe to be one more example of the weaponization of the tax system. And that is, this whole notion that we're going to single one group out, right?
Yeah.
To be affected by this and not others. And finally, I agree with Keith. All roads lead to renunciation for those who can.
We are picking up, and you and I are both picking up calls and people contacting us to start the process on renunciation. That's for sure. And you know what? I think I do want to conclude with something. I said I was going to let you conclude, John, but I think I'm going to do it because what you're reminding me is something that we've mentioned a lot on this channel, and I'd say it's a version of this: the proverb that you can't cheat an honest man. Well, the obverse is true. A dishonest person is incredibly easy to cheat. And we've seen this. So when someone is promising you that someone else will pay your bill, you might not be as honest as you think you are. And you might be more cheated than you think you will be. And we've seen that time and time again. And that's sort of the history of this country. And it's also the history of taxation. All the terrible things happen when someone else promises you someone else will pay the bill.
Yeah.
So this is, hey, I want to thank Keith and John so much for joining me today. And really, I would say, if you are a Democrat, I think what John and Keith said are absolutely true. Won't surprise if it's passed. This is the first step. It's a slow, they propose things, propose, retreat, and it will probably be someone else's name on it, and it'll probably be lower. So if I was a Democrat, I would be screaming at Warren, what are you doing with this? And I would be uniting every Democrat, unless you truly want your wealth to be confiscated. This is Anthony Parent of Iris Medic, and I thank you for watching.